Yeah, my background is as somebody who got a doctorate in educational policy studies in the 1980s, who taught education courses of various kinds, history of education, sociology of education, politics, philosophy, and then sort of drifted over into the policy studies area, and which is what I've been doing for the last few years. My political background is just somebody who's been wildly interested in politics at all levels for my whole life, and someone who has studied public policy very intensely for the last, I would date that to my beginning graduate school around 1980, so about 34 years. Got very involved in the sort of the Jewish aspect of the Palestinian justice movement around 97, and joined with some people up in Chicago when I moved out to Champaign in 98. They formed a group called Not in My Name, which is now a part of Jewish Voice for Peace, which works on obviously global and national issues regarding to Palestinian justice. Got very involved in the local anti-war movement in Urbana-Champaign after September of 2001, protesting both the war in Afghanistan and Iraq in 2003, and have been sort of active locally in that movement ever since. It's kind of thinned out a little bit. And beyond that, I've been very active locally in writing and speaking and being involved in various local issues. Most recently, there was a movement against building a new jail, against spending that money and spending on a new jail and doing other things with it, which actually won. So I was a very small part of that. But mainly what I've been doing is, for the last few years, is really intensely researching public policy at a national and state level to try to understand how we've gotten ourselves into the situation we're in, how we might get out of it, and bring some ideas and some vision. And I've been writing about that. My local newspaper, which is a Republican newspaper, has been generous enough to provide a forum for my views, which are, generally speaking, leftist views, and both in their letters and their Sunday commentary section. So I've probably published about a dozen Sunday commentaries over the last 4 or 5 years there. Not a lot, but every 2 or 3 months I put one in there, usually based on some serious research. And all that provoked me to look at the other two candidates in the race for Congress in the Democratic Party primary and see that I don't think that they brought any new ideas to this campaign. And I thought that if there's any time in my life that I was gonna do something of this nature, this would be it, and this is what I'm doing, and I'm having a great time doing it.
You referred to your campaign as an insurgent.
Yes.
Campaign. Can you talk about that?
Well, first of all, one candidate has been selected by the National Democratic Party power structure. She was recruited by them, by Nancy Pelosi, Dick Durbin, Penny Pritzker, the whole pipeline, the whole gang, to be a sort of winnable candidate in this sort of 50-50 district. I don't think she has any experience in thinking about public policy, and I don't think she has much to say about public policy. I think she will go to Washington and follow orders of the Democratic Party, and that's not what we need. We need people to question the leadership of the Democratic Party from the top down. It's not Dick Durbin's party. It's not Obama's party. It's our party. It should be the party of the people who vote for it. There have been periods in history in the 1930s and 1960s where the Democratic Party truly represented, or came more close to truly representing, working families in this country. It's been a long time. Clinton turned away from that in the 1990s. The process had started before then, but he certainly put a lock on that. I think Obama's presidency has continued to turn away from the Democratic Party as representing working families in this country. I think that the 435 members of the House of Representatives have an enormous responsibility to the people of this country, not just to their own district. I think that this is a crucial time in the history of this country in broad issues, in terms of war, nuclear war, in terms of climate change, and in terms of economic inequality, all of which are related, all of which are related to exploitation, the exploitation of our Earth, the exploitation of the globe, the exploitation of people by each other within this country. So I think we need new ideas, we need clear thinking, we need real vision, and I don't see anybody in this race or any other race that I know about offering anything close to that.
Policy-wise, if the Democratic Party is off track, name a policy position or three where you are the different person, why?
Well, I can name 16 because that's what's on my list. And you may, I meant to hand these out and I forgot, so if you would be so kind as to pass those around, that would be great. And I would be more than happy for you to probe me about any of these issues and how I've come to think about these things. I guess I would preface my comments by saying that we really need to understand how this economy works at a global level. We need to understand how it works at a national and state level. We need to understand how budgets and taxes work. We need to understand how wages and labor work in this country. We need a really big picture to understand what are the big pieces that need to be changed to create a very different context for state and local governments to operate in. That can only happen at the federal level. There's an enormous amount of power at the federal level to make choices about the $17 trillion economy that we have and how our resources are allocated within that. Let me just summarize a few of my points here. I support bringing our troops home and dismantling both our empire of military bases and the unconstitutional national surveillance state. I support ending the unjust and racially biased war on drugs. I support ending poverty, which in our rich country can easily be done. We are too rich a country to have as many poor people as we have. We have to start asking why and what we can do about it. I support legislating a clear path to citizenship for undocumented and immigrant workers. I support increasing the unjustly low taxation levels among the richest among us. I support providing Medicare for all, single-payer and universal health care at the national level. What people over 65 have, everyone should have. I support funding free public higher ed and ending student debt. This can be done at the state level, but can be only done if reforms on the national level, especially in relation to medical care, which matching Medicaid so burden state governments, change the context in which states fund higher ed and get it back to being free like it almost used to be when I was in college 40 years ago. I support reversing the ongoing privatization of K through 12 public ed. Charter schools might have been a good idea if they hadn't become corporate for-profit charter schools. And that's exactly what happens. And again, I oppose Democratic Party policy in this regard. I oppose Arnie Duncan, another Chicago person, in this regard. He's no friend of school teachers and public employees working in schools. I support moving to a living wage, human and social service economy through federally funded full employment at federal, state, and local levels. We need millions of jobs in infrastructure, transportation, human and social services, conservation, medical, daycare, preschool. Money needs to flow down from the federal level to state and local governments and school districts to fund free daycare and free preschool and get college students out of debt and to get a situation where young people can graduate from college without debt and know that they can start a family and not have to pay most of their income for daycare and preschool until their children start school. I oppose free trade agreements such as NAFTA and the pending Trans-Pacific Partnership. Of course, I oppose fast track, which is an enormous amount of pressure being put, again, by the Democratic leadership to go to fast track. And,
but not Durbin.
But not Durbin, that's right. Very good, thank you. I had forgotten that. Go Dick. I support promoting and protecting the rights of workers to organize and join unions. What happened to the Employee Free Choice Act? Obama said he was thinking about supporting it. After he was in office, nothing ever happened. I support raising the minimum wage to a living wage for $15 an hour, which is currently being called the fight for 15. That's perfectly reasonable given productivity gains in the last 40 years, which are not reflected in workers' wages. I support removing the income cap on Social Security payroll tax and increasing retiree benefits from the bottom up. There's a lot of things that could be done in this law. Once we remove the income cap and start collecting all that more money, even though Social Security is in no way in crisis, it's solvent for 20 years even without that. The money from Social Security does not and should not be lent to the federal government. It should all be used in transfer payments. Those payments would go up if the payroll cap were lifted and the money wasn't lent to hide the federal deficit. And the payroll tax, the flat tax, could even go down as a result of that, obviously benefiting the lowest paid workers in this regressive tax. I support banning hydraulic fracking, moving intensively towards a post-fossil fuel future. I think fracking is insane. I don't even know why we could even be talking about that. It damages the earth, the air, the water, the people, the animals, the forests, everything. I think the notion of our country being energy independent is a myth. It's all about a global energy market. It's all about profits. I support ending diplomatic, financial, and military support to oppressive regimes around the world. And the two that I would name at the head of the list are Saudi Arabia and Israel, which receives so much of which in Israel's case receives an inordinate amount of what's called foreign aid, which is really military aid. And in terms of the Saudis, we sell them a lot of military weapons with to threaten the people around the Persian Gulf. And finally, I support establishing a sovereign and viable Palestinian state in accordance with international law and the support of the international community. I think that has been in the offing for 40 years. The primary forces working against that has been our own government, which has been a dishonest broker in this peace process, in this so-called peace process. So with that, I'll conclude my basic views, and I will be happy to take your questions.
Just on the military stuff, and I think you might have, are you saying no troops anywhere but on our soil?
I think that would definitely be something to work for. I don't know that any other country, other than perhaps in relation to NATO forces and of course UN forces, has troops anywhere on any other soil in this world. It's clear why we do. It's clear that we are protecting the interests of the 1% in doing so, not the freedom of our own country, and certainly not the freedom of people of the countries that we've invaded and destroyed since World War II, whether it be in Southeast Asia, Central America, the Middle East, South Asia, Africa, or wherever.
Okay. Should we participate in UN or NATO?
We absolutely should abide by international law, which are very clear. NATO's a different, for UN, yes.
Are those the two you mentioned?
Yeah, but I mean, the UN is, NATO is not the UN. The
Right.
UN is, the NATO is a projection of U.S. power. It's a projection of the global 1%. So there's a lot of problems with the manner in which NATO projected its power, say, in the war against Serbia in the late 90s. But if we abided by the UN Charter and in international law and join the UN in fair negotiations, in fair diplomacy, in dealing with conflict areas in the world, which of course will be much fewer once we get out of the faces of the rest of the world, then I think we should definitely participate in that, probably more than we already do.
If everybody gets free child care and covered health care and education and everybody's guaranteed a job, who pays for it and how do you pay for it?
Well, first of all, let me say that the wealth of this country is created by the labor of the people who work for it. So it's sort of nonsensical. I'm not accusing you of being nonsensical, Bernie, but it's not the first time I'm asked this, and I think we get used to thinking about this in a certain way. Real wealth is created by real work by real people. To say that we can't afford for people to create and increase the wealth of this country is a problematic statement. There's budgetary concerns and fiscal and financial concerns to be dealt with, and they could be dealt with very easily in 3 or 4 ways. One thing is not to be so uptight about the national deficit and national debt. The interest payments on the national debt are at an all-time low as a percentage of GDP. So just like with the phony Social Security crisis, we have a phony debt crisis used to generate an austerity budget like the Brian Murray budget, which I oppose, and 32 other Democrats in the House also opposed recently, among them Jan Schakowsky, who, Bernie, as you know, would be your congressperson if you hadn't moved down here.
Correct.
But in any event, there's other ways. If we want to limit national deficits and national debt, we can move to a Medicare for all single-payer health care system, which, in line with other countries in the world, would cost much less, could easily save $1 trillion a year out of our $17 trillion GDP, and that money can be used to make other aspects of the healthcare system better, but it could be used for other things. So we've got $1 trillion of money to play around with there. We've got hundreds of billions of dollars of money from the Pentagon and so-called national security budget, including the money that's spent to spy on us, that could be better spent on the programs that you are referring to. We could end corporate welfare. Corporate welfare is a hard thing to define, but I read an article recently that convinced me that we're spending $700 or $800 billion a year on corporate welfare, various givebacks, various tax breaks, various tax havens that the corporations are obviously not using to create jobs, because obviously so many people are still out of work. And the other thing is that rich people could pay more taxes. We can move towards more progressive federal taxes and federal income taxes, as opposed to relying on regressive state-level taxes. Every state in this country has a regressive tax system. When you look at the taxes overall at the state and local levels, poor people pay higher percentage of their income than rich people do. And what you take all that and you're talking about preschool, daycare, college, we're only talking about $500 billion to pay for all that, to give everybody free that's chump change at the national level. That's chump change at the federal level. So the money is there. Our economy and our government would look differently, and you'd have different ways of understanding it when Medicare was all, when we drive a stake through the heart of for-profit health care and all medical care was flowing down from the federal level. But as a country, we're spending over $2.5 trillion of our $17 trillion on health care. In other countries, that would amount to maybe $1.5 trillion at most. So you've got $1 trillion of money there to play around with to meet people's social needs, not to meet the profit needs of health insurance companies, of pharmaceutical companies with their outrageous patents, and medical supply companies. And it needs to be said that doctors in our own country, because of the manner in which the AMA works, make twice as much as they do as the perfectly decent salaries of doctors in other developed countries.
Are you going door to door a lot?
When I was getting signatures, I was going door to door. The weather hasn't been great for that, but we have phone lists. We are making lots of phone calls, and we are operating on a very limited budget because I'm not being funded by the National Democratic Party and all the rich lawyers, and I'm not being funded by the physicists around the country who had an extra $150,000 to throw at the other candidate. I'm being funded by a few $1,000s of people who support me, and we're doing a bang-up job of it. We've got all the materials that we need. We've got all the help that we need, and we need to obviously take advantage to get the word out in ways like this and in many other ways. And we'll go from there. We'll see whether people are ready to decide to vote for someone on the basis of what they believe or what they say they will do, as opposed to how much money they have, how often they see them on television or hear them on radio, or how often they get postcards from them in their mailbox.
Yes, and I know you dislike questions like this, but have you reached $10,000 yet?
I have reached $10,000.
Where are you at about?
I'm over $10,000, but frankly, only because I'm spending a few $1,000s of my own money in this campaign.
Okay. And you know that it's a giant district, and you know we'll do a story on you today, but those other things do tend to politically move votes if you look at the way things work. How can you?
We'll see. We can do the best we can. We can get it to as many people as we can. And all I can do is encourage people that if they want real change, if they want real ideas and real vision, they only have one choice. And all I can do is encourage them to understand that this message that would be sent by electing me in this primary would send a message around this country that people are really ready for new ideas and real change. And if people say that they want money out of politics, they have a chance to vote for getting money out of politics, for doing their work, for doing their homework, for being informed citizens, and going on our websites. You can go on my website. You can find many things I've written and many things I believe in very elaborate terms. And I hope that the people who care enough to prepare to vote in the Democratic Party primary will look at all of our websites and judge us for what we say, not how much funding we've got, or not how many times their picture ends up in their mailbox.
Are you saying should all drugs be legal?
I think all drugs should be decriminalized and regulated, and that the people who have addiction problems, which certainly isn't all people in relation to almost any drug, should be treated by the same public medical system that I'm promoting in my campaign. The war on drugs has been a racist war. It's been a war against African American communities. It's filled up our prisons. It's made for a mass incarceration state, which was well documented in by now a well-known book called The New Jim Crow in 2010. I abide by that book. I think we need to start doing the things that the author of that book, Michelle Alexander, has advised that we do.
How do you hope to work within the system in Washington? Because obviously you have to if you got there.
I hope to work with the Progressive Caucus, and I hope to work with anti-war Democrats or Republicans, and there are many Republicans who are worried about our military-industrial complex and our military bases and our spying. So on various issues, there are very many things that I can work with. I can work with the Progressive Caucus on the Back to Work budget. It doesn't go as far as my budget, but it's a start. And I could, most importantly, I can be a voice to put on the table all the things that I'm talking about here, and that other politicians will see that the voters in the 13th district, just a typical district in this country, are fed up with the 1% and want to take a rational approach, not a reactive approach, not a racist approach, but a rational and social justice approach towards dealing with the 1%, towards this sort of criminal class that has taken over this country and divided, absconded with enormous amounts of wealth from ordinary working families. And I mean that. I'm not engaging in any hyperbole there whatsoever. This is a criminal class on Wall Street. It's well documented. They're paying tens and hundreds of billions of dollars of fines, and they get what's called delayed prosecution, deferred prosecution. that's a concept that had to be invented by the 1%, by the 1%, for the 1%. How is it that J.P. Morgan can be levied billions of dollars worth of fines and no person, no human, is punished for the choices that were made that resulted in those illegal actions?
Back to how you would work if you got there, just for a final point on it. You mentioned that, for example, your budget strategy is different than the progressives. It doesn't go as far as yours does, but it sounds like you're willing to compromise with that. So are you willing to find a middle ground even though things might not go as far as you'd like them to be?
Sure.
What I'm trying to get at
Yeah,
is-
yeah. You look at, we didn't have a nearly big enough stimulus package in 2009, and it wasn't done in a way that really created enough jobs. It was a myth that it didn't work. It worked exactly how it was supposed to work. It created 2 or 3 million jobs. Unfortunately, there's 20 million people in this country who want full-time work who don't have it. We're 8 or 9 million below the employment trend that was established prior to the housing bubble crash of 2008. So we're still millions of dollars, millions of jobs short, and $1 trillion dollars or so short of the demand needed in the economy to put those back to work. I guess the compromise that you're referring to is that if we have to debt fund these 10 million jobs, we should go into debt for it. Yes, we should. That's making the economy larger. That pays for itself. It could be easily funded in all the other ways that I've talked about. But there's no point. The longer people are out of work, the more their lives are ruined. And there's millions of lives who've been ruined by the irresponsible policies of both Bush and Obama, who proposed this weak stimulus package and then afterwards decided he would focus on lowering the deficit. That was a very bad move. That was a betrayal of his base, and that was a big reason why the Democrats got voted out of office in the Congress in 2010. Very similar to what happened with Clinton in '94. 2 Democratic presidents who became president on the basis of their base and betrayed their base.
If we have a 50-50 district between the Democrats and Republicans, and you are way more to the left than your average Democrat, how can you possibly win this district?
Because the people who don't vote will vote for me. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
That's the people who feel like there's no real choice. They flip a coin. They don't see either Republicans or Democrats that are dealing with their issues. So I think that it's a myth that the Democrats can only win by moving to the so-called center. The center isn't where the people are. It's where the money is. That's why they keep going there. The Democrats in Congress nationally, and even at the state level, are afraid to find out that someone on the quote-unquote left. Don't look at my labels. Just look at what I'm supporting here. The American people, when they're asked, support all these things.
Well, a lot of people like some drugs being illegal and having troops in other places.
Most people think the war on drugs has been a failure. Most people, especially who align themselves with the Democratic Party, are against having these military bases all around the world, fighting these wars. But all I can say is, this is a real choice. Let's find out. Okay? That's what the power structure doesn't want. It doesn't want, either at the primary level or at the general level, it doesn't want to find out what the people really think when they have an actual choice.
Where does agriculture fit into your plan? I don't remember agriculture being mentioned.
Agriculture,
Big district.
it's a big district, and I don't cater. I am not catering to big agribusiness in my campaign. The Farm Bill, as it always is, caters to big, sort of negotiates between the big ag in the Midwest, which is soy and corn, and big ag in the South, which is cotton and peanuts, and it's all about big ag. It's not about the social needs and our food needs. The agriculture bill, of course, the food stamps part is horrible, of course, depriving that. But of course,
because it's too low.
Because it's too low. But we shouldn't need food stamps. with the $15 minimum wage, we wouldn't need food stamps. With full employment, we won't need food stamps, not in any event. We need food stamps because Walmart workers depend on food stamps, and Walmart itself depends on food stamps to increase their profits because they don't have to pay their workers. They depend on the food stamps, on the EITC, on the Earned Income Tax Credit. So back to the ag bill. We need a bill that favors family farmers, organic farmers, local food production and distribution. We need to move towards more local and regional food systems in this country. This national and global food system is environmentally insane. It can't last. And beyond that, the kind of food that's produced by Kraft is big in Champagne. The kind of food, the agricultural bill favors the kind of food that makes us sick. It favors a corn-based economy. Pardon?
What would your agriculture bill look like?
I can't say specifically what my agriculture bill would look like, but I can say that it would look very different from what it looks now. It would put family farming and smaller farming, organic farming and local systems and incentives and structures for those systems and farmers markets and food co-ops. It would put it much to the forefront of our agriculture policy rather than the profits of big agribusiness.
I think when we first talked, the word socialist came up, and you said you didn't shy away from it. Is there any country that has a model of doing things that is similar to what you're talking about, or how would you compare it to what is known as socialist or communist? Because you're talking about a lot, the government providing a lot of stuff for a lot of people, and nobody making too much money, sounds like.
Well, that's a pretty abstract question. We're talking about working within in a capitalist system here, which is a very brutal system from the top down. We're talking about softening that and modifying that and increasing government responsivity in a good way to meet human and social needs and social programs within this capitalist system. We're talking about dulling the edges of finance. Finance has become a monster in this economic system, and it's not good for the economic system as a whole. We're talking about financial transaction taxes, which can modify that and provide more money for government spending and human and social services. So I don't think you have to put a label on this system. You can look around the world for things, for countries where things are being done differently. But what I think Americans need to understand and don't understand, because unfortunately the media doesn't give them a lot of help in understanding these things, is that overall we're not a highly taxed country. Aside from how the government money gets spent on things other than human needs, we're not a highly taxed country. We're a country among developed nations. We're one of the lowest taxed countries. And those countries that are much more highly taxed, namely Japan and the Northern European and Scandinavian countries, have much more extensive human and social services programs and much less economic inequality than we have in this country. So this country is just a real outlier in using the government to meet human needs and actually spending our collective wealth in ways that people really want, and people need to be much better informed about that. And that's what I'm trying to do in this campaign. The basis for all the questions that I'm asking is this: we're twice as rich a country in real GDP per capita than we were 40 years ago. If you want to talk in terms of current dollars, we're producing goods and services at a level of $50,000 per capita in this country, whereas 40 years ago, we were producing it $25,000. We're twice as rich. That doesn't mean we should have twice as much. It doesn't mean our houses should be twice as big, or even that we should be making twice as much money. But we should have a much more comfortable society and a much more humane society than what we have now. And to try to answer the question of what happened to that money and who benefits from that being twice as rich is to answer these questions. Wages used to be constitute 50% of our GDP. Now they constitute 43% of our GDP. That's 7%. That's over a cool $1 trillion. Mostly was reflected in the paychecks of the bottom 80%. That's $10,000 per family that would be in their paychecks that weren't. And what are they instead of getting that money? They are $800 billion in credit card debt. Nearly $1 trillion in credit card debt, in revolving credit card debt. Okay? That's where we find ourselves due to policies of the last 40 years, not due to anything inevitable and inexorable about globalization or technology or occupational structure. It's the policies that have attacked labor unions, put some American workers, the most vulnerable American workers, in competition with foreign workers, have maintained high unemployment and lowered and stagnated wages. All these things that can be done in a country, whether you want to call it socialism or not, and I'd rather not. Okay, so let me retract my self-labeling as a socialist and just say that I want at this juncture, I would be very happy with a much more humane form of capitalism, in which there was a much larger government sector for social and human needs, from the federal government on down. And it's very important to stress that, because corporations, as we know in this state, play off states against other states. They play counties and communities off against each other just to get a tax break, just to get a handout. These things need to be done at the federal level, and it needs to be very clear that we are all at some level, when it comes to taxing and spending, we are all playing by the same rules. Not that there are many decisions should be made at the state and local levels, but in a way that don't put them in competition with each other in a race to the bottom.
What would a post-fossil fuel future look like?
We need to do the research to find out. And that's what's going on now. It needs to be better funded. But we're talking about urban development in a much, first of all, we're talking about conservation, not just renewable energy. And we're talking about developing wind and solar and all the stuff that you've heard about. And, you know, I'm running in the Democratic Party, but I'm sure if you go onto the Green Party website, which I often do, you'll find all the policy positions and proposals that you need to know about moving to a post-fossil fuel future. We really have no choice. We really have no choice.
Where does ethanol go with that?
I don't support it. I don't support it. It distorts. It's just been a boondoggle. It's a handout to big agriculture. It distorts the price of corn. It distorts our food system. It's bad for vehicles. It's good for those farmers who farm that corn. It's been a bad idea, and I'm not going to shy from saying that, even in this district.
Okay. Growing up in the same heritage as me, religiously speaking, do you catch flack for saying cut off all aid to Israel? I assume you identify.
You know the answer to that, Bert. Look, I cut my political teeth on taking a principled position on Israel beginning in 1997. I've done it from within, while being affiliated to Jewish institutions, while being unaffiliated. I'm well known in Champaign County for being the Jewish guy, one of a handful, but the primary Jewish person involved in this national dissident movement. And it's a principled movement. It's an anti-apartheid movement, okay? It's every bit as principled as the anti-apartheid movement was in relation to South Africa or relationship to Jim Crow in this country. So its time has come. I will be speaking to students on just that issue tomorrow night at the U of I campus in Urbana, and I'm proud to be doing so. And
have you visited the country?
Yes, I have. It's been a while, and my son happens to be there right now. So
when your folks call constituents in the district,
You know, my opponent, Ann Callis, always begins every speech by saying she's been out there and she's heard that people are angry and people are hurting. And I didn't really have to get out there to find that. I mean, I've been angry. I've been hurting at various times, not in poverty. It's been a long time since I began to understand how working families in this country were being treated by the people who run this country. When the jobs were flying overseas, when the small towns were dying, when the urban cores were dying, when the drug war was being fought. I've understood this for a long time. When I talk to people, it's about my views, and they tell me their views, and they ask me questions, and we dialogue. And they're thrilled, in many cases, they're thrilled to do so. They're thrilled to meet a person who wants to go into politics with real ideas, who can engage in real research and have real vision about where this country needs to be going. I'm not just taking a wonkish approach to this campaign. It's a very idealistic campaign and a very passionate campaign, but there's a wonkish aspect to it. And when people have it clearly explained to them, again, where did all the money go and why did it go there? And when people have it clearly explained to them that it's not their fault that they're unemployed, when it's this many people that are unemployed, it's the system's fault. It can't possibly be their fault. If millions of people were thrown out of work after the housing bubble destroyed $1 trillion in wealth in 2008 and $1 trillion in demand, consumer demand, it's obvious if they lost their job, it's obviously not their fault. People are tired of being told that they need to go back to school. They're tired of being told that they need more skills. They had plenty of skills when they lost their job. If they've been out of the market for years, maybe they need to hone their skills a little bit. But I don't believe in blaming the victims. And when my opponents, when it's so common for politicians to talk first about schools, about funding schools, as opposed to creating jobs, that's just a fundamental misunderstanding of the way this economy works. It's just the research is clear on this. There isn't a skills gap. There's a jobs gap, okay? Only the federal government can create these jobs. Yeah.
Sorry, I maybe I missed it. I still haven't heard you articulate what are the challenges facing people in the 13th Congressional District specifically?
There are no.
How will you help them?
These challenges are no different than the challenges facing people. I'm running for a federal office. This district is in this federal context, and we're dealing with foreign and domestic issues that affect people in this district. The federal budget greatly affects people in this district and in this state. So the federal government, the manner in which it collects and spends money, has to change radically in order to improve the lives of people in this district. I mean, that's all I can say. If you're running for office in this district, you're dealing with crumbs. You're dealing with the crumbs that are left over at the state and local levels from our regressive tax system. And you're doing that in a way, you're doing that in the context of corporations playing off counties against counties and cities against cities within this state. So if you're dealing with this crumbs, there may be better and worse ways to spend those crumbs. But at the federal level, we need to start talking about we shouldn't be dealing with crumbs. We're a rich country. That's what people need to hear.
So you have no specific priorities for these?
Medicare for all. It's the most important. The medical system distorts our economy, it distorts our budgets, and it makes for our for-profit healthcare system distorts our economy, our budgets, and makes for a lousy healthcare system that doesn't cover everyone, that has poor outcomes than those countries in which everyone's covered at some kind of governmental level.
This is your first run for office?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And I assume you don't like the NSA. Do you want it to go away? And how do you fight terrorism without stuff like that?
We fight terrorism by not creating terrorists, by having drone attacks all over the world.
Would you end
We
all
fight
drone
terrorists.
attacks?
Absolutely. They're illegal. They're immoral. The terrorism resulted from our foreign policies in the Middle East. It resulted from trying to control Middle Eastern oil. Okay. That was very clear, and I think that Osama bin Laden should have been taken at his word in this case, as evil a person as he is. He said very clearly what problems he was having in the late 1990s. We had military bases in Saudi Arabia, left over from the First Persian Gulf War. We supported Israel's oppression of the Palestinians, and we supported sanctions against Iraq. Okay, all those were horrible policies, and the terrorism coming out of the Islamic world would stop coming out of the Islamic world if we weren't trying to control the Islamic world by force. So we need to stop doing that.
We hit our 45 minutes. Do you
Okay.
have any final questions that we could I would ask you, what kind of job has Ron Davis done?
I assume he's done a horrible job. I mean, first of all, Congress doesn't take responsibility for being accountable, for representing the people and being accountable in things like foreign policy and fiscal policy and Wall Street, the Federal Reserve. They don't keep much of an eye. So many important things are decided in our country without accountability from the Congress. Beyond that, I mean, he's just sort of played games. But understand me clearly. The problem in Washington isn't Republicans and Democrats not getting along with each other. At another level, they don't get along with each other at some very petty levels, which the media overemphasizes. At a different level, they're on the same page. They work for corporate CEOs, they work for Wall Street, they work for the 1%. This Brian Murray budget deal and the free trade deals, the quote-unquote free trade deals, are not free and they're not about trade, really. They're for the 1%. They go under the radar unless people make a fuss. Rodney Davis is just standard issue Republican. I don't appreciate my opponents running as if Rodney Davis is the fount of pure evil in our political system. Replacing Rodney Davis with Ann Callis or George Gollin or Erica Harold or Michael Fershing can't conceivably change our Congress in any meaningful way. Me being in Congress can begin to change it in a meaningful way.